So we just Stack Overflow on steroids.
Yeah, it's Stack Overflow on steroids. That's the way I would I would define it.
Right. So today, LLMs produces code in a way that I would say is less trustworthy than the average developer.
When you talk to everyone about doing AI, they all say they're doing AI, but no one knows why. That there's going to be a trauma disillusionment.
So I think we should embrace it, and we should talk a little bit about where it's headed. But today, it is highly unreliable. And I would claim that we will always use it to the edge of our level of trust. Call it in a year's time or in 2 years' time, the vast majority of new code being generated will be generated by AI.
A quick note from the producer before we start this episode with Guy Podjarny. Since we did the recording, he has also started a podcast called AI Native Dev Podcast, which would be relevant for you if you are interested in this topic of software development in the AI world as well. So I'll let you check that out as well. And thank you for your patience. Let's get into the interview. AI-generated code or human-generated code? How much can you really trust the AI-generated code? Or is the fact that human-generated code has always been something that we had to test for security has always been a reality as well? So in this episode, I had Guy Podjarny, and Caleb and I spoke about how much the field of AI-generated code can be trusted. What's the level of trust you can have? We also spoke about the fact that what happened to the testers of the world when we started relying on the fact that, hey, people who build the code should be the owners of the code as well. Is there some space for that in today's day and age for the AI-generated code? How much of it would be adopted? A lot of questions answered in this episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. As always, if you're here for the second or third time, I would really appreciate if you can share this with someone who's trying to understand the world of AI-generated code, whether they're a CISO or a cybersecurity leader or an AppSec person trying to understand what AI-generated code is like at the moment in this market and where it can go in the future. This is the episode for them. I really appreciate you sharing this with them, or maybe even saying this as well as a future reference point when you come back to it. As always, thank you so much for your support and following us on social media as well. Enjoy this episode. Peace. Welcome to AI Cybersecurity Podcast. Today, we're talking about AI-generated code. Welcome, Guy. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's going to be fun.
Would you be able to just give a short intro of who Guy is and where you are in life at the moment before we jump into the whole AI-generated code conversation?
Sure. So I'm born and raised in Israel, went through the cyber parts of the Israeli army, joined one of the early AppSec companies, Sanctum, that got acquired by Watchfire, that got acquired by IBM. Went to found a web performance, a DevOps company that got acquired by Akamai. I was CTO there for a bunch of years. And from there went on to found Sneak, which is probably the thing that people actually might know me for, to help create this category of developer security and help embed security into software development. And that's the founder. I focus a lot more on sort of vision, strategy, kind of board responsibilities. I'm an angel investor and all that, so I have some lens on AI and on security from kind of smarter, younger companies that are floating around me.
Awesome. And AI and vision probably is a good start to the conversation of how do you describe AI-generated code to people? I think a lot of CISOs and people who listen to this conversation that Caleb and I have been having for the past few months now. How do you describe AI-generated code for people who may still not be aware of what it is actually?
The base instruction is just like AI-generated code, is literally code that's been written by AI. Code is written in programming languages. They're code language. It's in the words. It is a set of instructions for the machine to execute. And to an extent, they describe logic or instructions. And so AI-generated code is the LLM, and we're going to probably need to dig into AI versus LLM, because when we talk about AI security, the terms confuse. But it's the LLM having learned from many kind of lines of code and from a human language that describes them, that derives what is the intent of what you're trying to do it from a comment or whatever, and then it generates the code that attempts to do it.
I'm glad you mentioned it, because I was going to go with what Caleb just, I thought we just Stack Overflow on steroids. But
it's Stack Overflow on steroids. That's the way I would define it.
It's composition. You get a lot into the composition versus, the mixing versus the copying of it.
Yeah, I think I'm sure the average person on the internet who just sits there and complains about why a particular syntax in Java is pretty bad versus there's a lot. Obviously, we didn't oversimplifying it by saying it's Stack Overflow on steroids. But I think the true question, and I think this is what we're exploring over here on this podcast as well, is that how much do you trust what's being generated? And I think we were joking about this before we started recording about no one really has 20 years of experience in AI, but we're all like, there is I guess as a CISO or a cybersecurity leader, people are looking at this going, I have Copilot, whether there's GitHub Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, AWS has a version, everyone seems to have a version of, hey, you ask your developers to use this to develop code now, to what you said, AI-generated code. Where do you stand the whole first in terms of using the code in the first place? I think there's definitely some nervousness in the industry from a lot of people, whereas the other camp is, oh my God, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. Where do you stand on this out of curiosity? Because considering you're in the security space as well.
I think today is this sort of unreliable magic or Gen AI. It gives you superpowers in taking away a bunch of like mundane work. And in that, the sort of the auto completion is very compelling for it, but it's massively unreliable, right? Like it could be creating something that is entirely different. And I think from a security lens, it's in the same boat, which is it might produce code that is like incredibly secure and thought through on it, but really it's like it's still mostly a parrot. It's mostly copying things that it's seen versus depth of understanding. And so it could produce code that is like woefully insecure. And the key, I think, challenge with trusting it is the lack of reliability. It's just unreliable. It is a powerful tool, right? And it's the worst it's ever going to be, right? It's only going to get better. And so you should get used to it. We should all embrace like, how do we use it securely? But I think right now it's not easy to trust it because it's not trustworthy. It doesn't even claim to be trustworthy, right? Like it says so on the definitions.
If I were to like jump in, but then my comment is, what code is trustworthy? Even human quote unquote generated code from any engineer is not trustworthy. Actually, Guy, your entire business is based off of the fact that is a true statement, right? Like humans are creating just as untrustworthy code as probably any machine. I would actually lean on the fact that, hey, AI would be generating actually probably better quality or more higher quality code than you might get from, let's say, 70% of the engineers that are out there that are just going to quote unquote Stack Overflow, copying and pasting it into their IDE, as we all do. By the way, I would just to note, we all who are engineers have done this and continue to do it. So when you look at this, does AI really add any more risk to the equation?
I think we're mixing time horizons, right? So there's like the thing that happens today, and there's the destination of where it evolves to, right? So today, LLMs, and I'm going to insist a little bit on that sort of a distinction, because or Gen AI or LLM produces code in a way that I would say is less trustworthy than the average developer, because again, it could be asking it to sort an array, and it might be deleting the first elements. Like it still is able to do those things, and those are types of mistakes that a developer would not do. So is it more or less likely to remember to put a sanitizer in front of some input that it remembered? I think it's quite random, and it's also random between execution. And so a developer that's been trained, that's been done today, generally is more likely to at least learn from their mistakes. So I think today it does produce things that are less trustworthy than the developer. Furthermore, it doesn't have the context. And so a vulnerability, as you both know, it's not really in a code snippet. A code, you can connect 20 secure code snippets and have a vulnerability when you connect the flow between them, because oftentimes it's the omission of something, right? It's the lack of a check. It's the lack of an AI. Like today, it's mostly Copilot. It's mostly snippets that have been added. And so each of these things might not be a flaw in its own right, but it doesn't look at the sort of the holistic view. And I believe developers are more inclined to do it. They don't think in snippets. They might think in functions. They might not think big enough, but they do think about the flow of what they're building. And so a bunch of these things I think today do make it more likely. And there's some stats. The stats are super biased and they're all moving around and all that. So I don't think any of them is the panacea, like this is the truth. But there's some stats that show that. There's also, by the way, a lot of quirky things like Copilot tries to learn from the context in which it's in to give whatever the coding patterns and things like that you might be using on it. So if you have tabs open with insecure code examples in them, it's more likely to create an insecure example versus if it have tabs open with secure code in it. So it's just very unreliable. So I think today that is the case. We should talk about the future and where it's getting to. And I think an automated system that uses LLM but has built-in kind of flow engineering, not just prompt engineering, but the flow of how it's assessed and all that, and it generates things in a methodical fashion, can generate something that's more secure, because it's the opposite, right? Like it will become more reliable because it's machine generated versus human generated.
We augment code with humans, right? So AI, I feel like it's rare, or at least I haven't seen anything to the point where you're getting LLMs. Oh, let's keep it specific. LLMs are generating full-on executable real code that works. No matter what the X sphere says about LLMs generating these full-on apps, they never work. And in fact, like I found it to be extraordinarily frustrating to build real apps. But what they do really well at is this Copilot, which I think is a really amazing name for this, because it is about everything moving forward is quote unquote AI augmented, right? So I can actually, like, It really is the IntelliSense on steroids. I no longer need to have to sit there and understand the exact syntax of a language when I can intentfully say, I want to do this, create an array, and it will automatically know, oh, you're trying to create an array. Boom, here is you and the ability to create an array. Now, here's my challenge in this, which is, yes, that's super helpful, right? That allows engineers to be far more productive, 3x, 4x of what you're normally doing. But you are just as responsible for your code working as you were before you were doing it. To your point, Guy, if you generate an array and it's removing the first item out of that array, I, as an engineer, am still being held accountable for the code that I'm submitting. And I still have to test for the code that I am submitting. And LLMs are actually starting to become quite good at unit testing and generating unit tests to ensure that, hey, the LLM code that I did generate, does it actually work and do the thing that it supposedly says it does without that error coming from it?
Yeah, but I know, Caleb, like do you think a developer that writes code, or really a human that writes something versus a human that reviews that thing, gives it the same level of attention?
No,
like
I do not.
So I think it's basically that, right? So you, like, the AI wrote the code for you and you eyeball it. And fine, if it did something as egregious as in deleting the first item in the array versus sorting it, hopefully you'll spot that. And also the unit test will do it. But if it did not include an if it did not include an encode on it, those are a lot harder to notice. And the whole idea of these sort of code completions is that they help you run faster. And so if you need to give it the level of attention that is required writing the code yourself, which is also just like practical, like people don't do that, then like you're defeating the productivity promise that you're doing. So I'm not trying to vilify like the code that gets created it's pretty good code, and it feels quite magical when you write there. But I was writing for, my son has this like YouTube shorts channel that is all AI generated, and we created 4 or 5 streams of doing it, of fun facts. GPT generates some facts and
you want to plug that channel?
Yeah,
what's the channel?
Yeah. It's the fact trove. It's just like a fun, all AI generated little YouTube shorts. And as I was writing the code and using Copilot started making up this sort of story for me in the code, and said, I wrote something like, tell the user, and it continued that the first 3 elements are incorrect and that it should sum up so the next, like totally like anything that I had in my kind of code, and it does those. So I think today you can just go down these tangents, and I think So I think we should embrace it, and we should talk a little bit about where it's headed. But today, it is highly unreliable. And I would claim that we will always use it to the edge of our level of trust. If you don't mind a bit of a monologue or philosophy, I've got, like, when I think about AI solutions, I think about this 2x2. I think like you can place most AI solutions, probably most solutions, period, but specifically AI. On one hand, on one dimension is like existing workflow versus new workflow. So like, how much does it require me to change how I work? And on the other end, you've got attended versus autonomous, which is a measure of trust. Like, how much do I trust it to get it right? And if you imagine this as a 2x2, the solutions that are getting the most adoption right now are at the bottom left. And that's the sort of the code completion, the fill a form, the write an SDR, cold email, right? And it's because you can eyeball them and you can say if they're correct or incorrect with all the caveats we talked about. And it's things that you already do. And so they just give you superpowers if you want them to do it. And so the solutions that get adoption right now are those: low friction, low trust. Why wouldn't you do this? And they're getting a lot of adoption. And the top right is like the sci-fi, self-written, sort of self-correcting software. But I give an analogy of a book. If you have complete a paragraph or something like that, that might be at the bottom left. Autocorrect gets a little bit into more trust, but you still eyeball it. But write another book in the series, that's like a bigger chunk. It's harder to doing it. Or maybe create an infographic from like a textual book. That's a new way of doing it. And so that maybe that's more down the sort of the new ways of working path. And then the top, you have a book that adapts itself and changes to the reader as you read it. And I think from a security, like from a productivity perspective, we would always seek the most. How much can I embrace these new ways of working, and how much can I trust it? Because I want to produce the most. I want the most productivity boost. I want to be most competitive as a business. And so we will always stretch that. And from a security perspective, it's just at the edge, of like how trustworthy it actually is. I think you always need some security solution to guardrail you and say, okay, like in fact, the better the guardrail, the more you'd be able to embrace the AI, right? Because if it's about to go off track, something will nudge it back in place, or at least you'd know that it went off track, right? And you can recover.
Would you guys say that? I don't think any of three of us are disagreeing that people should not use AI to augment. But I was watching I think so. GitHub does this annual report on how much the usage is and what's the popular language and all of that. They had a stat on that around, I think like an increase 70% increase of usage of AI in the code being produced over 2023 on GitHub was using some form of AI. And they didn't specifically call out it was Ashish just who was interested for 1 second trying it versus like someone actively using it over a period of entire 2023. But at least from their perspective, one of the trends they called out was, and as much as these reports are true, but they have a GitHub Copilot as a product as well. So I can imagine that's why they're trying to push for it. But I would say I would take that with a pinch of salt. But it was interesting for me that as we're talking about the risks that a CISO may think about or a leader may think about, we're not in any disagreement that people should not use it. It's more the level of trust is where we are coming from. To your analogy of a 2x2 as well, Guy, that it's more, yes, you should use it. Yes, you should try and increase productivity for developers. The challenge would be at the scale of what most organizations work with, where they have 40,000 plus lines of code, and you have one little part from GitHub Copilot. And going back to where we started the conversation, somehow we made the entire thing more insecure because we added a little piece of GitHub Copilot in there without even knowing it. So where do we stand at this point in time in terms of, is your mindset that at the moment the adoption is high as well? I don't want to use the GitHub Copilot bias, but in terms of the conversations you guys are having with other people who probably are looking into this as well, the conversation is like, is the risk acceptable? If they are, is that even a real use case for more people? Are we talking about something which is still, to what you said about timeline, way in the future? And we're just on the edge of trust for, maybe we should talk about this now. Like, where are we at this point in time in the usage of AI for coding as well? Do we have a stat?
I would say that I don't have real metrics. I only have, I would call metrics based off of people that I talk to. And obviously the circle of people that I talk to are a very distinct set of circle of people that live in Silicon Valley. Like, and I think like when you talk to them, everybody is using it to augment what they do. I think what's a more realistic scenario is to find out people who are working at engineering and GE, are they using Copilot? Like, how, when you look at the mainstream, not the early adopters, like what are they doing and are they using it is probably a great question that I have zero insight into. Guy, you obviously have a product that's been adopted everywhere, but you're probably the best position to say, what have you seen? Do you see mainstream people really adopting Copilot?
Yeah, so generally the answer is yes. Moreover, we actually did a report at Sneak on kind of AI adoption and perspective on AI security. Not only does it show that like in those sort of older organizations, people use Copilot, people break they violate company policies to use Copilot. So like the company says you're not allowed, and they insist on giving the company productivity boosts and using it behind the scenes. So some people are better at blocking that than others. And we also see this from CISO customers of all sorts of a little bit more, I don't know if it goes quite back to the core industrial kind of companies, but definitely companies that I would say are in early majority versus early adopters, that you have CISOs coming to us and talking about this as this is a reality, and they're slightly freaking out, whether some more thoughtfully than others, of what do I do around this? But I think everybody's adopting it. And frankly, like a lot of people, you need to see the light, right? Like as soon as I started, developing with Copilot, not that I developed much, like for me, it's side and mostly overhead. It's hard to stop. It's almost like developing without the internet before you had it. So there's no doubt it gets adopted. I don't think people should freak out about it. I don't think that it is so woefully insecure that you should shut down everything around it. I just think that we need to be prepared, right? Like the reality is that in probably most companies, or at least most early majority, maybe even into the late majority companies, call it in a year's time or in 2 years' time, the vast majority of new code being generated will be generated by AI, right? I think that's almost fact. Like it's a very kind of a non-controversial forecast.
Yeah.
And so the question really from a CISO perspective, what do you need to do to be ready for that? What type of trust controls do you need to deal with it?
Do you have that answer?
I think there's another bit that we didn't talk about, which is that security vulnerabilities span dev and AI code, like human developer and AI developer code. So in practice, the two are really intertwined. And so I think, as biased as I may be, that with this sort of increased productivity, right, if you're going to code faster, you have to also security test faster, and you have to automatically fix faster. And if you don't do any of these latter two, you're going to get in trouble. If you don't test fast enough, so if you don't accelerate and automate more your testing, then you're going to increase your risk because you're producing more code. You're going to be moving faster. The code is going to be eyeballed. And even if it is equal in sort of, even if it's better in on average security level, it's probably still, you're going to have more vulnerabilities. And so you have to lean into automation of security testing as it stands. But if you only do that, then you're just going to have an even bigger mountain of vulnerabilities that you cannot accept. You have to accept that if you're going to let AI generate code for you, you have to let AI fix the vulnerabilities that it finds as well. We have to chart a path towards autonomous fixing. And that's why I also separate the LLMs from the AI, because the LLMs are like language oriented. You can eyeball and doing it. They're supervised, like in the code, and then use some LLM to generate the fixes. You have to combine the dev and AI, and you have to automate.
I did a post on my LinkedIn as a challenge saying, I don't believe that AI generated code causes security issues. And I wanted to see the responses that came back from that. And actually, out of all of the responses, I think there was only one that I actually feel was extraordinarily valid. And also, I think is a base level that does speak to what you're talking about, which is AI generated code creates more code, which creates obviously more complexity and more attack surface. And at the end of the day, if you are now augmenting and your engineer is now 3xing, 4xing, 12xing your productivity, you're 12xing the amount of code. And that means that there's way more complexity, way more attack surface that gets generated because of that. And that is an absolute true statement, right? Like at the end of the day, AI generated code is going to create more code. And so when you look at even a standard process, which is, okay, I submit a PR, it should be peer reviewed before it gets accepted, right? There should be a second pair of eyeballs that looks at this and says, yeah, this is good. But now if you're generating more code, then the people who are peer reviewing are going to get overwhelmed with the level of code that now is being submitted. And so how are they going to be able to do this in a manner that actually you can, oh, the answer is AI, right? Then you need to use AI to now then say, let's review that second so that I can peer review that second pair of code, approve that PR. But then it says, well, now you're creating way more functionality faster. How are you going to test all of that code? Going back to your point, Guy, now you need AI to start testing for that code. And that then becomes another bottleneck, which we're already, by the way, if you look at in a world without AI, our bottleneck already is testing, right? When you look at true integration testing, that's the bottleneck for every enterprise. Nobody actually does integration testing well. And that is already a bottleneck. And so when you start seeing 10xing or 12xing the amount of code that you're producing, and then how is AI going to help on testing is a phenomenal question, because now we're going to end up with 12x more bugs because people don't test today as it is. So like, how's that going to look in the future is really fascinating.
Sounds like a startup idea. I was going to say, maybe someone should start a startup in this.
There's probably like 50 of them that are trying to do that. But
but one, I do know of one. Yes.
Do you?
I do.
Oh, because I imagine the moment this episode comes out, because it's an obvious, and I'm glad both of you called this out as well. The more code that is being created, it kind of is like a reminder of what happened when DevOps became a thing, and people like 2-week sprint. Now people, not just the developers who are already frustrated by sprint model and agile way of working, that, hey, I have to deliver a new feature every 2 weeks. That also added pressure on security, which kind of also going back to what you guys are saying, if you're producing 12x amount of code, I imagine for the application security teams out there, they'll be looking at, and maybe Guy, you're in this space as well, there would be an overwhelming demand for how quickly can you have the right context so there's not enough false positive being generated, because the code is no longer just 10,000, it's 40,000 lines of code being created. As long as it may sound like where doomsday is appearing soon, is there really a reality to this at this point in time, do you feel?
Yeah, I think, first of all, like the DevOps analogy is good. And I think, Caleb, to your comment as well, like I think DevOps, cloud, and AI now, they all compound to accelerate the rate of software development, right? Each of them is another multiple on sort of the rate of software development. The more they compound, the more necessary it is to have security controls adapt and changes. DevOps and then midway cloud has accelerated software development so much that the notion of shift left has gone from a nice to have and a productivity boost to a must have. Nothing. You cannot keep up outside. And AI is just like a massive exclamation point at the end of that sentence. And so I think you have to automate more. I see, and we can dive into that, sort of this evolution of AppSec into this sort of dev and AI trust as doing it. And trust is an interesting term. We can probably unravel it. But before we go there, I think the comment on false positives is interesting because in some ways, if the fixing is automatic, so some people call false positives to different things, right? But most false positives, really, they're saying this is not important enough to care. They don't really say this is a mistake. They say it can't be exploited. It's not a real vulnerability. To an extent, if AI does the fixing, you almost care less about these types of mistakes because the effort or the cost to you is fine, do some defense in depth. So I'm not calling this vulnerable code in this library. But if I can just upgrade to a secure library, then what do I care if it's a false positive or not a false positive? Like it is, I'm no less secure. There's the risk in change. So you have to accept that's back to your testing comment.
If the level of effort is, this is why I think that has become a standard inside of organizations that you start coming up with clean container images, right? Or golden images is what a lot of people will call this, where it's just easier to ensure that you have a good base that always is refreshed and cleaned and patched, and engineers have the expectation that is always going to be the case, and then they code for that, than it is to say, let's scan our libraries for vulnerabilities and then one at a time patch them. It just doesn't make sense. It makes way more sense to start with clean images, refresh them every 2 weeks or whatever your cycle is, and everything gets deployed with these clean images, and engineers just know to expect this process, right? Then I don't care about scanning them for vulnerabilities. I just know that they're always going to be refreshed in their 2-week timeframes.
Yeah. I think with dependencies, it's easier to reason about it. We have this new-ish capability about 6-9 months now around AI fix. And I think when you pull that thread, it's really interesting when you think about developer behavior. It's a lot of fun. In the immediate term, it's pretty easy to think, okay, in the IDE, it's like an autocorrect, right? I found a vulnerability, I can right click and correct it. Maybe it's trustworthy enough that you can just do that without you right clicking. And then fine, okay, you go to the pull request, that's the natural kind of next step. Okay, so in the pull request, there's the code review, the AI code reviewer, I found a vulnerability and I can also fix it. I can propose a fix here. And now that's great. But what about all of my previous vulnerabilities? Can you go to my old code base and find all the vulnerabilities and just fix them? And the reality is that the risk in that is actually not at all in the fixing and everything to do around that lack of testing. It's really about how much do you trust? Like the effort is not in the fixing, it's in the, yes, and now I will deploy a new version. And do I trust that flow to work? I get back to the word trust because I think like we've always known security and reliability and quality overlap, right? Like any kind of half decent will know that if their system is higher quality, it's also more secure. It's like by default. But like now a lot of these things really intermingle in this AI. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for almost like an evolution, an expansion of AppSec into trust.
I do think the biggest challenge in security is lack of testing. The fact that remains is when you go and you say, I need to patch something or I need to remediate this vulnerability, the problem for engineers isn't the remediation, it isn't the patching, it's will our shit still run? Like that's the question that is always the problem. I remember that one of the companies that we had a Excel spreadsheet, and I'm not kidding, this is how we kept track of this, of all of the dependencies, the primary dependencies that we had in our code. Right. Wow. In that spreadsheet, we had basically a yellow, green, red measure of if any of these guys ever did a dot release or a point release, what is the risk of our system breaking because of that? And so, for example, many times people will say, oh, if it's a dot release, it won't have breaking API changes. But like you can't trust what they say. You can only go by your experience. And so there's a spreadsheet that says, if this library does a point release, it's red because the breaking changes is very highly likely, right? And so there's this whole spreadsheet. And I remember as security and AppSec, we had to go look at this spreadsheet to determine, okay, out of all the libraries that need to be patched, we could easily go to the ones that were green, that were point releases. And if they had security patches, we could instantly submit that to engineering, and engineering would be like auto approve. Great, it's good to go move it. But if any of them were in red or oranges, it was like, no, we need time to evaluate, test, And that's the bottleneck. It's always testing. It's always the testing that's the bottleneck.
The best practice I see is when they say, look, I want to be secure by default. When there's a vulnerability and it comes along, it runs the build. If the build passes, it auto merges and the dependencies. Oh, you're unhappy with that? Improve your tests. Add more tests so that if the thing breaks, the build will break and it would not auto merge. Like the system totally supports that. But the answer isn't let the security vulnerability patch wait. The answer is improve your tests. Like just it's a simple, but most security teams don't have the, I guess, the mandate or the sort of the authority
100%.
within the organization to make such a statement.
That does not exist in most companies.
It's actually it's the young ones in which someone did that at the beginning, and then it's just that's just the reality. But yeah, it's very hard to instill.
Although in an overall thing here, which is actually good engineering hygiene solves the majority of security problems. For engineering, if you have phenomenal testing, integration testing, which by the way is I think extremely hard to do and very complex to accomplish. But if you do it, your engineering efforts become that much better. Your rollouts are that much better. Everything you do becomes faster and higher quality. Security just gets solved as a byproduct of that.
Yep.
Wait, so what happened to all the testing people? I'm going to age myself here. There used to be a testing team for every deployment that used to happen in different environments. Somehow that team has completely disappeared before even AI became a thing.
Nobody invented a fun acronym yet for the whatever. Like someone went with DevQA, but that just didn't cut it.
Yeah. So Guy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like the philosophy that sort of created this is there's this philosophy that says if you take away the QA team, then engineers, it's going to fall to them. So then the responsibility of the product working is going to be on the engineer who built it, right? It's like you build it, you own it. So there is no QA team anymore. It all just falls on the engineers to ensure that their product runs. That's the philosophy. Whether that has actually worked or not, I think is a great question. I don't believe it has necessarily worked, at least not in what I've seen. I've just seen an acceptability of bugs is more of what I've seen.
I do think it increased, like fun fact that Caleb and I used to be competitors for a while in Dynamics back then with testing, and we tried to go in part after the QA teams that make security testing a part of QA, and that also hasn't quite wasn't the dominant factor.
Well, testing just died.
Testing just kind of I think the philosophy is okay, but and I agree that it's correct that you build it, you own it, and in theory it goes to the operations, and you do see that, right? Like you see developers owning the page, right? What I think lacked is that the ops side built a platform team and built this notion of saying, fine, now there's like dedicated people that get paid very well, by the way. So the sysadmins became SREs, and they are building platforms to make it manageable for developers to operate if they do their job well. That did not properly happen, I think, in QA. There wasn't any equivalent. Now, platform teams today sort of not really do that. So that's a shame. I think it's almost, I feel like sometimes these things are these like forks in the road, right? There wasn't the right person, company, something to lead some movement. I don't think it's a principled thing that didn't exist.
I'm going to make a prediction here. My prediction is I believe actually LLMs and generative AI is the thing that's needed to elevate QA to what's similar to what you're saying, Guy, to that next level. Because the problem with testing has always been it takes so much effort to create an integration test. And by the time you finish it, it's broken already because the code has changed, right? So at the end of the day, the real problem is that testing does not move as fast as engineering because it's brittle, it's very sensitive, and it takes a lot of effort and time to build a test. And so the real issue has been, how do you make testing as dynamic as engineering is? If you can do that and you can keep up with the way the code actually works and create real testing for that, then you actually succeed, and testing becomes the next generation version of this. And actually, Guy, this will be funny. Do you remember Coverity, of course, right?
Of course.
Do you know Andy Chow?
Lightly.
So Andy is the CTO and founder of Coverity. He's a good friend of mine, also competitive to both me and Guy to some certain degree way back in the day. It's weird, by the way, that all my competitors are also my friends now today, which is unusual. But
early in the movement, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Andy went and he has a startup now focused on exactly that, which is it's called Ventrilo, which is how do we make it so that testing is as dynamic as code, and using LLMs and AI to see if that's possible, which if you succeed, it's really hard. But if you succeed, that is a massive market and a huge gain in productivity.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'd go further and say that software development will change. I think a lot of our conversation today was about the short term. It was
Yeah.
about 1, 2, 3 years in which code completions, code augmentations, a fixed recommendation, snippets of code that get recommended on it. And I think building an app today with LLMs is very hard. It's also like a brand new practice. But I think over time, software development will change, and it will change to be, there's a bunch of these analogies, right? One of them is the developer will become a team lead of a virtual team of AI agents and a supervisor of sorts. And so that's one analogy of you'll become a manager almost. Another is more of a spec and an architect view, right? Which is you'll provide the specification and then AI will provide doing it, which is more akin to outsourcing, right? It's like you outsource your development to AI. By the way, both of those introduce an interesting insider threat risk, right? Single point of failure, because like a single person now is producing a lot. And there's a bunch of these other analogies, but they all revolve around the fact that AI handles the implementation and that a lot of it comes down to the specification. And actually, if the specifications are more clear and they're extracted from the code or they're even driving to the code, then once again, testing, it's the three pillars really of software development is specification, implementation, and then verification. Those are the three things you do, right? You say what needs to be done, you implement it, and you verify what you built matches the spec, and so on and so forth.
I was going to say, but in reality, it doesn't happen in any organization. So,
well, in reality, everything is in the code. In reality, today, the truth is in the code, right? Like you wrote some spec, and then you wrote the code. You encountered a whole bunch of problems as you were coding, and so
correct.
all of the knowledge accrued to it, and then some subset of it you also test. And so, like today, the truth is in the code. I think that promise will take a while to materialize. And you look at infrastructure as code, right? In theory, infrastructure today should be a symptom of the code. It should be infrastructure as code, defines your entire infrastructure. And really, if you supervise the infrastructure as code, you click a button, it gets regenerated. Like the code that is actually deployed, the deployment should be a thing that you should barely monitor. Like you're monitoring maybe for attacker or things like that, but you should know what's there because you've coded it to be deployed. In practice, it's very few organizations are at that level of like maturity where it's truly like disposable infrastructure. But eventually that same journey almost I'll define what my implementation, my application should be doing, and then you'll test against it. So I'm supporting the comment, Caleb, that I think testing will grow in prominence, but I think it's more than just, it's twofold, both because LLMs will enable it from the test tech perspective, but also because software development will evolve towards specification and verification as the primary job that it's being done.
Yeah.
That's deep on the sort of the change of how you work dimension.
Yeah.
So that's not happening now.
Out of all the analogies, the analogy I always thought of was more like almost like a manufacturing chain, right? Where when you're creating some sort of product in a manufacturer, by and large, most of the large pieces are automated, but you have manual human in the loops at various points that are verifying or adding things in that loop that says, oh, okay, we know that this, to your point, like this big chunk of code has just been spit out. There's a human in the loop that says, everything was looking pretty good. I can spot it, move it on to the next thing. And it goes down the next line to the AI looking at it and then making some changes and adding some components to it. But I feel like at some point it starts getting to that level. And okay, now I've just got a couple people who are, to your point, managing and spot checking and making sure everything is getting produced at the right deliverable at the end.
Would you guys say at a practical level, we are, as much as all of us are maybe talking about edge cases at this point in time, as it may seem for the rest of the world, we're thinking of, I think a lot of the conversation that I'm having with people in different organizations, they're primarily working on LLM models and how we can use them. Like I think there's a very popular airline company over here. I think the CEO kind of called out like spending millions of dollars on how they can do AI. We were in Switzerland a couple of weeks ago, which is known as a pharmacy. Like the pharmacy is a big industry in Switzerland, and the pharma tech people are talking about how they can use AI. I'm going, pharmacy using AI. Because I got curious and like, hey guys, I'm curious, what are you guys using AI for? And there's all trying to see use cases, but there's nothing nothing they have found so far that is directly impacting their bottom line. So they're not looking at it seriously, but they're investing because they're probably worried that their competitor may find something. So maybe where I'm going with this is that as cybersecurity people who would be either listening to this conversation or will probably have some kind of stake in the pie, for lack of a better word, what is the current opportunity cost over here for us? What should we be doing? Because I think there's a whole angle of, some of them are edge cases. I've started looking at LLM in my organization. I'm looking at more architecture things. Someone is using GitHub Copilot. Is there we spoke about testing. Should we look at testing as an organization? Maybe cybersecurity people listening to this conversation should think about, hey, how can we include testing as part of the LLMs that the developers are creating? Should we ask them to make unit tests as well and not just use GitHub Copilot to create a piece of code, but also add a test to it? What's the opportunity cost here, maybe to put a spin to that, hey, it's not just the fact that we just wait and see what happens. I want to give some hope to people as well. That what are we supposed to do right now while this world is evolving?
I think the good news is I don't think if you think about the move to the embracing of the cloud, then I think there was a bit more of a real and immediate danger. Like someone could deploy a thing on the cloud and no protection. I think the use of AI is like a little bit less dramatic. It's a bit more incremental. And so I think you need to be mindful of it, but I think it's maybe like a little bit, at least when it comes to like use of AI to generate code, there's a different aspect of you're going to create some LLM, scale up to your sort of a video explaining what you call the customer LLM, I think, when getting data access, those can be immediate. But when you're talking about internal use of LLMs for generating code, then I don't know if there's like a hair on fire, you have to do something tomorrow or you're at massive risk. So I think it's more, in my opinion, it's more about like getting your strategies in order, like learning a little bit more about what this thing is, not reverting to the blocking strategy, which is an absolutely doomed, failed strategy. Like you cannot stop technology. That's not going to happen. And so thinking about what are the means, what are the tools that you need to be able to have trust. I think from there you can evolve practices like the sort of, hey, you have to generate unit tests. But I think right now the levers that CISOs have or the security leaders have are much more in the security control side. They're much more in the make sure you have visibility. It would have been nice, like we're talking to some people are really keen, it's really quite hard to do, to get an inventory of the code that was AI generated. Maybe that's doable, maybe that's not. So I think people, they need to get a handle on it. Right now, I'd say most CISOs, most security leaders can't really articulate their concerns in a like learned fashion about this. And so that's the key problem.
We're early. Yeah.
And it's moving so friggin' fast.
Well, only thing I wanted to call out, and maybe the only action that I've taken away from all the conversations that I've had with people who've adopted GitHub Copilot or any of these other code generating tools has been more on the fact that if you are concerned, you can ask your provider for what data do you use from our side. To your point about the privacy being a bigger thing, for my proprietary code is being sent to the AWS of the world or to GitHub of the world. What are they doing with? Are they learning from my proprietary code? Is it going to my competitor or whatever? I think at least having an understanding of that is definitely required. I think at this point in time, even as we are seeing a lot of CTOs going, yep, we're adopting GitHub Copilot, we're doing Microsoft Copilot and whatever else. And I don't know if you guys agree with this, but is that a good enough start, at least to have an understanding of where the metadata of the code and how it would be going there? Or is that also at this point in time moving so fast that maybe we just have a sound strategy and hope for the best?
I don't know, like, I know, Caleb, you might have learned this a bit more. Like, I agree that data protection was like the biggest, when you ask CISOs what's your biggest risk, like it really comes down to the data, people leaking data. And I agree that's a concern when you post it. I think the concern around I'll share data with OpenAI and they'll get breached, I think that's overstated. It's a little bit more akin to the they'll get breached, or they're like that would somehow magically, even though they state for over a year now that they do not use it for training purposes, it would still somehow spill over into sort of some repository, and people would also magically be able to deduce that as well, some strategic secret or the code. I think that's a bit more akin to people like when we move to the cloud, it says, oh, the cloud wouldn't be able to like secure infrastructure. I think these platforms are pretty good. If you're using some sort of nascent startup for that, or maybe you should think, but if you're using one of the established cloud platforms, I don't know. I think you've got bigger worries to spend your time on, and as CISO, than whether OpenAI will train their models despite stating they don't on your code.
Yeah.
Like, is it really that big a risk? I don't know if you guys see that someone else training a model. And I agree with you that no evidence has at least been shown so far where my code has been shown to, I don't know, let's just say Walmart's code has been shown to Amazon people or whatever. But that risk, I don't know where it came from, but maybe it's a lack of understanding of how these things work, but could be the fact. But is that truly a risk? Would you guys both agree that that risk is almost, I won't say impossible. The reason I bring it up is because as we're talking about the AI generated code, we've been talking about it for almost some time now. We spoke about different aspects of it on what can make it better. I think where I'm coming from is the fact that for people who are listening is at this point in time where they've been asked by their CTO or executives to like, hey, we're using GitHub Copilot. I wanted at least someone to go walk away from this episode with an actionable thing for, hey, it may seem like some cases are edge cases. The LLM models that are being generated, they're obviously looking at that problem. But from an AI generated code, apart from the fact that my code is being used for ChatGPT to tell my code to someone else, is there anything else they can be looking at to what's the opportunity that is there for them to look out for?
First, we should probably start with what caused the fear, and then probably go into, because of that fear, here's where it is, and here's where that fear can be mispronounced. And there's actually other kinds of things that we haven't talked about yet, which is a lot of enterprises' bigger issues are more on a licensing and copyright problem when it comes to code, which we haven't even touched at all. But first, we'll start with the fear. And I think the fear was when the first GPT, I think it was actually like GPT 2.5 or something like that came out. They were crawling everything and they were grabbing everything. And there were repos of code that would happen to grab that came from a certain company, that it was private code. And when you actually went in there, it would auto-complete these sections, letter for letter, on this code. And there was a research paper that got published that was like, look at this thing. I can get this big company's code. This big company says, oh my gosh, that shouldn't be in there. And then it created this fear, obviously, that, oh, you can extract proprietary internal code. And let's be frank, this thing was already out and in the public already. It was there. It's just you had to know where to get it. And that sort of created this like fear. Also in this version, there was another research paper around how you could extract secrets. You could say, if it's repeated enough times and it's in there with enough frequency and you know enough of that secret, you can extract that from an LLM. Okay. So this is where this, fear of whatever data gets put into an LLM, I can extract out, which, by the way, does have some truth. If you do it, if you put enough data in it, in enough frequency at enough times and enough of that data, you can have it auto-complete it for you. That is definitely true. However, it's just not true in general, right? If I'm shipping things to, like what Guy's point to, let's say OpenAI, and they're saying I'm not using this for training data, then it never enters the model's training at all. At that point, it's impossible. It will not get reproduced. And even if it did, here's the other thing. Let's assume a worst case scenario. Let's assume that your data is hiddenly and maliciously by OpenAI on purpose, shoving your stuff into their training data. You would still have to have an attacker have enough knowledge of that data in order to extract it out of that model, which is way more difficult. It's actually easier for that attacker to phish you and get that data than it is to them extract it out of an LLM.
By a mile.
It's actually easier for them to hack OpenAI's probably API proxy and grab your data through their API proxy than it is to try to grab it through the data, through the model itself, right? Like when you look at like the risks of where your data is going to get taken, like if OpenAI gets hacked, it won't be them grabbing the data out of the model. It'll be them grabbing the customer data out of their infrastructure because they're proxying it to them as any third party would. So to CISOs, the first problem is this is a third party risk problem. Right? Do you trust OpenAI or do you not? Is really the question. Same as Salesforce. If I trust Salesforce and or Okta, I have third-party risk engagements. I have legal documents in play. This is the thing that I've got to manage. I cannot manage what they do with my data. I can only trust that what they say about what they do with my data. Unfortunately, that is where the CISOs are at risk. So yeah, there's a lot that goes on in there. Then it goes down to the copyright, I think, licensing issue, which is a big deal, right? Where, if AI is generating code in my code base and it's copying clearly open source code that is there that has a certain license on that, as soon as I insert that into my code, I then have to open, like that is an absolute no-no. We cannot allow that to happen, which is a really valid concern, right? Because what Copilot will generate is off of open source code, which is there, which has been inserted with lots of frequency, which then means it can auto-complete those exact code snippets. I don't want that to happen. However, I think the message to CISOs and to engineering organizations is Microsoft, I know specifically, has now stated that they back any code that's generated from Copilot. So any code that is generated from Copilot that has that in any way, means, or possible is flagged as a licensed copy, Microsoft will fully defend you. So they will take their means, costs, and resources and say, we guarantee any code generated will not infringe on licensing. But if it does, we will help support you. in that.
I'm pretty sure Google has the same thing, and I think all the big players have. I think this is a real risk. I think very well phrased, Caleb, there. And I think the third-party risk is real if you are using, I guess it's a point in favor of, especially if you're a larger enterprise, using one of the larger LLM frameworks versus one of the smaller ones, just by virtue of that, both indemnification and maybe like ability to trust their sort of security posture, maybe the expense of price or the expense of some sort of edge. And also there's more and more that you have to think about if you're going to self-host the models. There's just so much to still figure out. But I think that's also, to me, just the point, which is it's not just whether this is a valid concern, which is, I think Caleb explained very well now. It's also whether this is the concern you should devote your limited attention to. So I'm saying you have real things to worry about. Go focus on those real things. Don't focus on the ones that, are just whatever.
I was talking with a CISO and we were talking about this exact problem. And I was like, hey, can't just a DLP, some sort of like outbound, don't you have a DLP proxy or filter? You can just mark when you see PII going outbound of your organizations because you have some egress filtering on your enterprise. And he was like, we don't have egress filtering. And I was like, that is probably a bigger problem.
A bigger problem,
than people dumping your data into GPT.
Maybe one last thing I would also add is, because a lot of the other industries are catching up on this as well. If, to your point about Microsoft and Google saying that they would cover the legal cost behind this, there's a whole cybersecurity insurance conversation as well that a lot of CISOs talk about, where something happened to Okta, that there was the incident that they had. I didn't follow up in terms
which
of
one. They've had multiple. So
yeah, well, all of them. But
they're more about like the Rolling Thunder type of, just sort of.
I guess where I'm coming from is the fact that I don't even know other industries that are like affiliated industries like cybersecurity, insurance, and others. They are ready for something like this. Like the whole Air Canada incident that happened, or even the Cherokee, there was a Jeep or whatever. There are a few things that happened that the company just has to accept the damage that was happening because of the loss of customer, whatever. Are you guys finding that, is there only a small set of cybersecurity industries that are catching up on the whole AI thing? Or is this wider in the sense that cybersecurity insurance and, I don't know, legal and all of that? Because and I know I'm asking a very, how long is this piece of thread question, but I'm curious if in any of those conversations you guys have had, it came up, because in most of the conversations I had, they said, oh, the insurance has started talking about, hey, are you likely to be impacted by ransomware? Like ransomware has made it all the way to an insurance document for every annual verification. And the fact that if you don't update your software patches, or if that was a concern or the reason why you got hacked, then we can't cover you.
God, I have so many rants on just that alone. I don't even want to start. It has nothing to do with AI.
Maybe we'll go to the AI one.
The question basically is, when does AI get into these sort of insurance questionnaires?
I mean, not just insurance. I think it's just the wide, like, a lot of people use safety net as the insurance thing, as a safety net, or I guess we'll just say software composition, and as a way, if it does make it as well, I would at least pick the fact that, hey, it looks like my AI has put in like a licensed library, which I don't pay a license fee for. Do we feel the peripheral around software development has started evolving for AI at this point in time?
I don't know the answer for cyber insurance, but I think when it comes to AI code generation and security, if you put the legal risks aside, which hopefully you're indemnified for,
that's right,
then I think what it does, and this is also maybe the takeaway for people, is that it levels up the importance of doing things you should have been doing in the first place, which is automate your security testing and act on it and build it into sort of the core flow, of have it be executed as part of your software development flow, right? You can call it shift left, you can embed it in there, call it what you will, but don't have it be done by a team that is external to the dev team. Be part of the dev flow, because otherwise you would just not catch up. And so what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't blindly trust the AI code is secure, and you shouldn't try to block the AI usage in total, because I think you'll just be secure all the way to bankruptcy, right? You can't do that from a business perspective, but it levels up the urgency of putting in the right AppSec controls in practice and automation, and leaning into more automation versus some human verifications. Like a lot of people they do all this automated verification, and then they still expect their AppSec team to review every vulnerability. It's just not going to keep up. So you have to really think about, how do you automate? And I think cyber insurance is actually less of a concern over there, because I think in general, from a risk posture perspective, it really it ratchets up the urgency to get these things done. That's my view. Like, I think it's the acceleration of software development and rate of change, so much so that you need to stop relying on people and start relying on automation, as everybody wanted to do before, but this just bumps it up the priority list.
So if I were to, I'm going to switch a little bit. And we talk a lot about, I think, as we do, because we're security people, about the pessimism around AI and the issues and the risks and all of the things that these things produce. But I'd love to hear from you. Like, we know what's going to happen. You predict in the next, obviously, code is going to multiply, as we talked about, more and more of these machines start get created. When you think about what you're doing today, what are the positive things that you think AI is going to bring to the defenders in the next couple of years? Think 2 years and 10 years, maybe even. What do you think is going to happen here that allows us, because you're in that position, right? You're helping defenders do their job. What do you think in the next 2 to 5 years that things are going to change for the better that you never would have thought would have been possible a year ago?
So I think that it's a critical angle. So it's a very good kind of question and angle to do it, because we have to build towards something positive. And also we know that the attackers are going to use. Yeah, so you have to think about how do you leverage it for defense. I think fundamentally AI opens a path for us towards the perfect SDLC and the perfect risk management, because it allows, like, a lot of the reason that security isn't done is like a mini form of negligence, right? It's laziness. It's the fact that other things took priority. Similar to the testing conversation that we had. It's because people just don't bother to doing it. And I think with increased automation, and AI kind of opens up this opportunity to automate things that were not automatable before. You can make security easy and natural and automated and autonomous throughout the development lifecycle. And it can, on one hand, take on the mundane, whatever, from SBOM creation to test creation and execution to indeed fixing all vulnerabilities and things like that. So a lot of these things that are just, they're chores as part of sort of the development flow. And over time, I think right now, AI looks at the tiniest context, but tools build on top of AI. It's not just like an LLM that you would tell it everything. It will be like a system that sort of builds on top of the LLM, can aggregate context and see things or explore complexities and graphs that help you find all these different paths an attacker might take. And so I think from an AppSec perspective, I think the journey in AppSec is for simplicity, right? There's how hard, for anything in life, there's how hard it is, and there's how much you care. And you need to care more than it is hard. And generally today, like, we keep trying to get people to care more. We keep like blasting them with innovation. It's working, but it's inching. And AI really allows us to drop this bar. I think there was any success for getting developer adoption and things like that. A lot of it was precisely by lowering the difficulty. Make it a why wouldn't you use? And I think AI opens a huge opportunity around that. So I think that's the big picture. There are tactical opportunities that are really interesting. The ability to learn, to understand language, as it's discussed, allows for like new paths with threat modeling and others before. The somewhat probabilistic, but still multi-parameter analysis allows us to connect to dots that might not have a clear one like a human would. You can look at something in production and look at something in development and say, yeah, these two are related, a human would.
Yeah.
And so there's all sorts of like tactical points that I can point to, but fundamentally it allows for like really simplifying it. It's interesting to think whether that would be applied retroactively. There's almost like a race now to me about the sort of the change of software development and the change of AppSec. Because if you were to think about this sort of this spec-centric kind of future world of development in which AI handles the implementation, some of these controls, they could be built into that reality, right? Like they can just be there versus the need. I'm sure there's going to be a greenfields and brownfields opportunity here, right? There's going to be the sort of in these new stacks, can you build a perfect SDLC inside of them and secure SSDLC? And for the brownfields, for all the code that never dies, can you retrofit these old fixes? So that's how I think about it and how we approach it as well on this thing side.
So it's finding the thing that actually can do both, sit in the brownfield and help create the new greenfield. To your point, like one of the things that you said was, if you think about just this automated process of both generated code and remediating that generated code, right? You have taking our existing process and just scaling it, which is someone writes the code and someone audits the code. And then actually someone probably writes the fix for that code. And these can be 3 different models that effectively say, I'm producing the code, I'm now auditing that code, and I'm now writing the fix for that code. And then the ability for these things today, to your point, it's like These don't, it's not a matter of caring anymore, right? Because you have so many, they're just automatic. And so you're doing this at scale, which means that hopefully, if you take the happy path, the prediction in 5 years, to your point, which is that actually AppSec vulnerabilities will always continue, but you'll never have to notice them anymore, right? To some extent, after the remediations start becoming practice, and then even over a period of time, those fixes then start becoming core foundations, and they'll just stop generating them completely, right?
Like
After
spelling mistakes in documents. Like today, there's a lot less of a concern because autocorrect just works, right? And it moves. And every now and then it does there's a deviation, but all in all, it works. And it works pretty well. So I think that's the path we do. So I've always felt that AppSec was underutilized. The analysis that we do is underutilized to all these worlds of other aspects of quality and software, which I now think of as facets of trust. It was like, how much can you trust your software? And trust is, I think, a good word. Well, it's useful in security because it has become a little bit the evolution of security to trust. But also, I think it is, at the end of the day, especially when you think about AI generated, that's now our holy grail, is that we can produce software with humans and AI that we can trust. And trust includes security, but it also includes reliability. It also includes accessibility. It also includes privacy. It also includes performance. It also includes, I think we've always known, even again, back to the original DAST tools and SPY and Sanctum, that a lot of the knowledge, a lot of the learnings are overlapping. And we see it in the ops world right now. We see the DevOps versus SecOps world, right? You see all the DevOps players going to SecOps and vice versa. It's because that these data kind of overlap. And so I think that's the other thing that will happen in AppSec. So like, these were AppSec aspirations, but the other opportunity maybe with them is to open up a bunch of these other facets of trust to have the product satisfy. So maybe that's more of a business opportunity than a security prediction.
What's your sort of view around, there's a lot of these startups now that are using LLMs to focus even earlier in the life cycle at the design phase and the engineering requirements phase of the life cycle. Normally, you'd have to create a developers champion program where you would get engineers so that we could do secure design reviews and look at what's going on in the requirements. And if things change, sign off on them and make sure they do the right thing. What's your view on the way that these startups are now tackling that? Is it the right direction? Do you feel like this is going to make an impact?
Yeah, I'd separate my view as an investor for the companies and my view for the technology and capabilities. So my view for the latter is very positive. Like, I think LLMs allow us now to interact and automate processes that are that build on human interaction. You can listen to a Slack channel, you can read Jira tickets, you can read design documents, you can listen on a call. I think it's clear to me that's useful. It's basically, you have to ask, if you had a security expert sitting in, reading all those texts, leading all those, like listening on the calls and all that, and being smart enough to chime in when it matters, right? And when it's helpful and has enough context, which is important, and that's problematic for these companies, but has enough context of how the system works to contextualize what's being said on the call and all that, would that improve your security posture? And the answer is yes, absolutely it would. They would flag out, like either of you two or sort of me as well, sit on all of these calls on it, would probably prevent a bunch of security problems because we can hear them ahead of time. So no doubt that is doable. I think it's hard, and I need to figure out how do you not be annoying. I think figuring out the context is hard, but I think the tech will absolutely happen. And I think it's very valuable. The companies is different. I think there's a problem in LLM land and AI land, which is the disruption is built in. What is novel about what I've described is not the layer that is being wrapped around it. That would be commoditized and non-differentiated. And so AI startups around the world, the thousands and tens of thousands of them, so many of them are just building practically the same thing. They're building products that in practice are 90% the same, kind of building them at the same time. They're all being funded. And the reality is that none of them really, I think, has an opportunity to build critical mass and differentiate. I think eventually that value will accrue to the incumbents, whether it's through acquisitions or through kind of building a capability in-house. But I do believe that 5 years from now, that would be a common capability in an AppSec stack.
I was going to say, for the one AppSec person who's listening to this conversation, if we get to it, would they still have a job, or would they just become that what happened testing field where they just disappear? LLM would solve everything. So there was no need for testing at some point. Would there be no need for AppSec anymore as well?
No, I don't think so. I think AppSec will be, it would continue down that path of, you're not an auditor. You're not supposed to be reviewing vulnerabilities any more than an SRE person is there to respond to incidents. It's not your job. Your job is to be a platform builder. Your job is to make it easier for others to build secure applications, for the dev tools to build secure applications. And the exact tools in your toolkit probably in 5 years will be pretty much the same, but they will be with some new features and they will evolve over time. But I think at the risk of this being when all you have is a hammer, like everything looks like an nail, but I really do feel like that this is it's a continuation of that trend, which is it has to be moved. Security has to be moved into the inside, and the role of the AppSec person, there's the SRE, there's the AppSec person, maybe there's a new kind of resurgence of some testing equivalent person, and their job is to build it into the platform, make it easier for whoever it is writing the code, human or AI, to get it right.
I just want to double click and say 1,000 times yes on what Guy said. I think the majority of cloud security team, AppSec team is not about, it used to be identifying vulnerabilities and managing vulnerabilities. It's most of the time is spent in how do I invest in a platform? How do I ensure that we can make this easier for others? That is, prevention is everything. And the more you do it, the better off you're going to be. And like, Guy is spot on with that. And I do think there'll be a time where what we were talking about here, AI and vulnerability management can get muted out, but being able to build a platform and embed in these kinds of things is going to be very difficult to just eradicate over some period of time.
It's already happening with the self-service platform that people are creating at the moment with cloud anyways. Like people, if you need a lot of databases, let me just create a platform for you so you can request it. But
yes,
in conversation. Last 5 minutes, any final questions before we wrap it up from you, Caleb, or Guy, from yourself to any of us?
Yeah, do you have any questions?
Yeah, we didn't.
Well, I don't know, Caleb, but which AI security startup are you starting? No, I don't know if the world is already concluded.
That's a Caleb question. That's not my question.
Yeah, I have to just start one because there's so many people who already assume I've got one, so I just need to start one. Just
might as well. Stop prophecy of it.
And sure, I'll tell you about that startup later after this call, Guy.
Just register an LLC and put it out there, Caleb. That's what you need to do.
I think it'll be interesting. I think it'll be. I don't know if I have a top question as much as I'd say it'll be interesting to see the rate of adoption. I guess to me, like a key question is there a trough of disillusionment still? Is it everybody rushing to doing it and then there will be like a year of pullback, or is it just all forward? But
I'm betting on a trough of disillusionment, that there's a trough of disillusionment that's going to come
in 2025, not in 2024. 2024 is like everyone's kumbaya right now with AI is going to solve all world's problems. 2025 is with the delusional thing is going to disappear. Both of you, what do you guys think?
I just feel, here's what makes me say that is the problem is when you talk to everyone about doing AI, they all say they're doing AI, but no one knows why. That is the signal to me that there's going to be a trough of disillusionment, right? Because if you don't know why, then clearly you're going to be disillusioned. It's not going to meet a set of expectations because you have none. Basically, the only thing is I know my competitors are doing it. And I know that if I say AI, I raise more capital. So these are the two things that I feel are happening, but no one really has a purpose. No, it's very few that I've said, hey, especially security teams, because CISOs are dealing with this. They're like, our company's doing AI. And you ask them, do you know why? What do you mean why? To what purpose are you trying? What problem are you solving that you think AI is going to solve? That's a very hard question to answer. And so it has to happen because they're going to spend all this money and they're going to get all this stuff and they're going to dump it for a year and they're going to be like, oh, we don't know what problem it's going to solve yet.
I agree there's going to be, I also feel like there's a whole world of a data AppSec type thing, right? Like if you think about data driving behavior in applications increasingly with this AI reality, and I think a lot of CISOs are waking up to realize that they've nurtured 10, 20 years of relationships with their sort of engineering teams, and engineering teams have certain practices that are even slightly mindful of security. And then suddenly they have this like new team that they can't even place in the org charts, and that is like suddenly like holding the crown jewels and driving kind of functionality. They come to them and says, where is that data from? And it's like, I don't know. It's been there. It's always been there. I was like, so how do you develop? Well, sure, I SSH into production. And then I do that, like, just like all these back to square one. I think there's a whole new practice that you can probably find a better guest to discuss over here that I think would be interesting. But I also feel like there's going to be some scary moments. There's going to be some breaches, some elements, which I think would also get everybody to be like a little bit momentarily freak out. Eventually, I don't think it's a false trend. I think it goes up.
Yeah.
But I think it has a dip in the curve and then kind of comes back up.
And I feel like even all the successful ones still have that dip, right? As they're trying to figure things out.
It's a hit reality.
It's reality.
Yeah.
And I also think it's that adoption too, where I think like people are looking at AI as the end all sort of solution versus what I think AI is really good for is more like function calls, very specific function calls of things that you want to get done at where it can do a really good job. But that's not how people are thinking. They're thinking, oh, you just throw it in here and it's going to eradicate, which by the way, they are right in probably 4 years or in the future. You're correct. You can use AI that way, but that's just not the way that you can use AI very effectively, I think, today.
Yeah. No, super
Awesome.
super interesting.
That is a good thought. And so another good thought is just to focus on fundamentals. You have bigger problems to solve than AI right now. So focus on that for people listening it.
Maybe you can use AI for it.
Yeah, or do that as well.
Yeah.
But Guy, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate your time. But I'll leave your socials and I'll leave your son's YouTube channel as well on the socials for people to check out random facts for short videos. But thank you so much for making the time, man. I appreciate this. Looking forward to having more conversation as this AI field evolves, man.
I'm happy to do it. Super fun. Yeah. And also looking forward to seeing how much of this is we get right and how much of it we get proven wrong.
100%. Awesome. Now, thanks, Caleb. As always, thanks, Guy. See you all in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to that episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. If you are wondering why aren't we covering all topics, because maybe the field is evolving too quickly, so we may not even know some of the topics we have not covered. If you know of a topic that we should cover on AI Cybersecurity Podcast or someone we should bring as a guest, definitely email us on info@cloudsecuritypodcast.tv, which reminds me, we have a sister podcast called Cloud Security Podcast, where we talk about everything cloud security with leaders. Similar to the AI cybersecurity conversation, we focus on cloud security specifically in the public cloud environment at cloudsecuritypodcast.tv, which if you find helpful, definitely check out www.cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. Otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. Have a great one. Peace.